at the time, though, I don't think that was a criticism. I think that is very much, this is a criticism. We're judging this off of our modern attention span, off of their entire, I think we're
That's
judging
true.
this off of a lot of stuff in retrospect. So I don't think the album should really be like super downgraded based on what we were saying. I think we're more providing context of why we are feeling that way.
So June 21st, 1994, they give us an album that's 23 songs, 44 and a half minutes in length. That is a major point on this record, is that it's 45 minutes long and 23 songs. That's where you and I were having our initial issues with their album, is that it was just so long.
Yeah, and I hold on. Excuse me. Jeez.
Bless you.
I hold on to that even after going through and having a week of really loving Let's Go. Like this has been like Let's Go week theme, and like my Spotify, because it's like, hey, let's have fun listening to Let's Go. So I would still probably put it, if I had to really sit down, as my second best Rancid album ever. I think it still can hold that spot. It is a little too long, and I think it's the second part of the album just I don't find as good as the first. But again, those songs that you'd be cutting off, I think that's a good EP. Like I think that would still be very good. I just think they put everything they had onto this album. So and at the time, though, I don't think that was a criticism. I think that is very much, this is a criticism. We're judging this off of our modern attention span, off of their entire, I think we're judging this off of a lot of stuff in retrospect. So I don't think the album should really be like super downgraded based on what we were saying. I think we're more providing context of why we are feeling that way. Also, and we should just put this out there, this is also just the problem of like being contrasted with other stuff. The problem with Let's Go is you have to contrast it to the band I got on my shirt, right, or to the album I got on my shirt right here with "And Out Come the Wolves." That is like a ridiculous standard to uphold. When we did our Rancid Sodom ranking, we both talked about how we had to sort of accommodate and move some Out Come the Wolves songs out of there just to make it a listenable. Yeah, because honestly, I would go, if I had like my old time list, like the most objective version, not the one that's a good podcast and a good discussion, but it would be like Roots Radical, Radio, and then like most of the songs from Out Come the Wolves. I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. I just think objectively, those are all the best songs that band did. That band's a very good band. All their albums are very good. Their worst album is better than most bands' best album. I just think in comparison to that, this one's a little bit tinier. It's an extremely significant album with a ton of really good songs and gems. Because it's so long, I think a lot of different Rancid fans have probably the experience that I've had over the years. Like, I remember this one in my truck all the time was always like a skip around one. Even back then, like I say, our perspective on it being too long is a modern one. I think we view that as a problem. I just know back even in the day, I would kind of jump around on this album a little bit. So I am unfamiliar with like some of the songs for an album I've listened to a whole hell of a lot.
So, okay, we had a good run here, man. We had like probably 8 weeks where we didn't hardly disagree on anything.
Oh.
Tonight's been our disagree night. We've disagreed on a bunch of stuff. And so I think I disagree on the what side of the album is better. I don't know that I would say that side A is necessarily not as good, but I think side B is incredibly strong. There's only one song on this album that I can't listen to, and it's the second to last song called Name. I just don't care for it. I don't care for it.
I mean, I think that'd be the worst song on the album. Like without, like you're saying it off the top of your head. I was like, yeah, the song before 7 Years Down. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. You so
don't know that. Yeah, it's just
you don't know my name. So, but it gets stuck in your head. So I guess it did its job, right?
Uh-huh.
So the album's long. So before we go into in-depth talk about this album, I just did a 12-minute video on Tim Armstrong. We talked about it earlier about like sounds changing and sounds being like made and a new thing. Bro, Tim Armstrong has done that 3 times. That's insane that one person has made basically a new sound 3 different times, and that people have tried to replicate it, and nobody has really come that close.
Mm-hmm.
There is no band that is as good or sounds as good as Operation Ivy in that subgenre. I'm sorry, it just doesn't exist. Rancid has a literal sound. They've got the Rancid sound. It's a California Rancid sound. People try to emulate it. We got the Interrupters, we got the Distillers, we got Left Alone. Lots of bands try. None of them really quite capture the magic that Rancid does. My man gets bored and starts a whole ass new genre with the Transplants, and again, nobody can emulate that. I just wanted to just say that again because I think it's crazy. I think it's insane, and that tells you a lot about this album. So, okay, this is where one of my points is that this is where that sound, the Rancid sound, starts to formulate. It starts to come up from this. Lars joins the band. They have a thicker, more full sound with a lot more lead guitar. They go from that gritty sound to a little more like, I don't want to say poppy, but it is kind of, it's got like a pop sensibility to it that wasn't on their first record. And I think that Tim was starting to kind of come into his own as a songwriter. Like Operation Ivy's got a lot of pop in it. He had it back then. In between Operation Ivy and Rancid, we have Downfall. Have you heard Downfall?
Yeah, I mentioned it quite a bit a year ago when I did my Operation Ivy video too on the channel. We listened to quite a bit of Downfall.
Oh, dude. So first off, anybody's interested in having like an official Downfall cassette, holler at your boy. I'm making some official bootlegs, artwork and everything. It's gonna be awesome. I'm very excited. It's just like a little passion project I'm doing, like all hands on. I'm not doing anything like insane. I'm making like 10 copies of it. But I figure like 8 people might want one of those. I just don't want that music to go anywhere because it sounds like a really good amalgamation of the two bands. It sounds more like Operation Ivy, but it still sounds like you can hear where the
Rancid sound comes from. Yeah,
man.
It's the closest I think of all the between Dancehall Crashers and everything they did in between Op Ivy and Rancid. It's the one that most sounds like Rancid, but it's clearly connected to Op Ivy. It's a nice bridge.
So good. That could have been another Op Ivy album. It's that good, and it would have held up with energy.
And really, it was just the only reason, like maybe why that doesn't become the band that ended up taking off was because of Tim's issues. Like that was really the case there. Right. It's not like they were like a bad band or any of those bands were necessarily like look what Dancehall Crashers went on to do right after them. You know what I mean? So
facts, 100%. And so Let's Go has a lot of. I don't know, man. We have complained about Let's Go a lot because it was a little long. It's a little monotony, if you ask me. That's the word I'll use. It's a little monotone because it has a sound that goes pretty much all the way through it. There's no ska on there. There's a couple of songs of Lars, a couple of songs of Matt, but it's mostly Tim.
It's not matured yet into the the Rancid thing yet. It's not quite there. It's almost there.
It's infancy.
It's right there. Yeah, because there's songs on there. And I think that's probably my distinction with the two sides of the album, where I kind of feel like that first side is stuff that would be more like from a songwriting perspective that would fit a little smoother into the later albums. I do have a problem with the way it's set.
Dude, St. Mary, Dope Sick Girl, international cover. Those are like my favorites. Those are all side B.
I know. St. Mary would be on my.
I know, it's crazy, right?
Again,
I do it all the time. I argue with myself. I'm
Again, I'm thinking of Name, Motorcycle Ride, Harry Bridges.
Motorcycle Ride. I like Harry Bridges. I love
Ghetto
Harry
Box.
Bridges. I love Ghetto. Dude.
Those are the ones that I'm thinking of.
This album this week, dude. I haven't liked this album this much since I was a kid.
And I think a lot of the things though are like intentional choices that they kind of changed or got different. One thing I have in here is the fake Lemmy thing. They hadn't got it as good yet. Like,
what do you mean?
So there's always like the need for this kind of singing within Rancid, and
that's all Matt though.
But here's what I'm saying.
That's just how he sounds.
I know, but.
Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of Matt. There's a lot of Matt vocally on the first album, and he plays a fairly significant role in this one. Going forward, you have Lars picking up a lot more of that vocal weight, and I just think he's got the same kind of thing. It's the gruff sort of gravelly thing that voice he's bringing into the band. But I think he takes up that space in a way that just fits it more of. And again, I don't even know if it's necessarily better.
He's a better singer.
But what I prefer in Rancid, I think at the same time, I think Matt gets not necessarily better, but what Matt does fits the songs even better. It's pretty amazing what he's doing here because he's driving a lot of these songs because he will always be the best musician, I think, in the band, just from a technical standpoint. But I think he's a lot more domineering on this. And he doesn't quite have the Operation Ivy thing on this album like he did, where he's creating those beats in Operation Ivy, which almost sound like a completely different song than the end product we're hearing. Right? I feel like this, if you were to hear Matt play a lot of these solo on bass, the songs would be very recognizable because they carry a lot more of the songs, as you're saying, from like the monotone thing. So I think those things got better. Also, Tim's voice is almost reverse. Tim's voice is a little gruffer, or it's recorded a little bit different, I feel, on some of the songs on this album. Whereas when you go back to Operation Ivy or forward to Out Come the Wolves, it's a little bit different styling that he's using along with the gruffness. Now later on, he became a little gruffer as he got older and sort of adjusted that style. I think the style's a little more raw on Let's Go, so it adds that kind of charm to it. But I do kind of, it doesn't, again, I'm really making the point of why An Outcome the Woods is a great record, which is not what we're here to talk about. But I think it's a few of those things that are just slightly missing from, like I said, I think it just hasn't, the cheese or whatever hasn't aged into its full form. Again, Lars is a big part of it. I think the thing that started it, that really kicks it off, is Brett is way more active in the recording of this album than he was. He gave him the platform for the opening album, but he was actually active in the production of this album. And I think a lot of times when you have these pop elements added to these punk bands, Brett is usually a pretty big factor in adding a lot of that stuff or making these into more accessible sized songs.
You talk about Brett Gurewitz.
Yeah.
I, for whatever reason, thought you meant Brett Reed, and I was like, interesting. I did not know that.
No, Brett Reed was not the guy who put the pop into Rancid. I do not think.
Dude, I was like, I did not know that.
In this conversation, I should clarify. Yes, not the drummer Brett Reed, but the producer, Epitaph guy, Bad Religion guitarist Brett Gurewitz.
Okay, okay, I haven't listened to this album. Oh, okay. Remember a couple weeks ago when we talked about Enema of the State, and I said, man, I just didn't really want to hear this album until I hit play, and then I heard it and was like, I was in. It was exactly the same thing that happened with this album. I didn't really feel like listening to it at all. And I got into my car and I was like, okay, I have a literal 45-minute drive to work. It's exactly the same length as this album. I'll just jump in the car, hit play, off to work. I sang the whole damn album. Like I had it cranked up, bro. I had a blast. So I think that this record, you couldn't get Out Come the Wolves without Let's Go. So for that reason alone, this deserves respect, right? I still don't know that I would rank it above some of the other albums, okay? But if you go song by song, it might be a better quality album than the other albums because
it's just a little fatter.
Yeah, but like, so like percentage-wise, does this have more good songs than Indestructible? Yes. Dominoes? Yes. Maybe not for me, Troublemaker, but Honor's All We Know? Yes. So it's like, okay, well then how do I say it doesn't fit? Because it's all subjective. It just depends on what you like. But man, there was urgency in this record. That's what the difference between Let's Go and Out Come the Wolves. There was urgency there, and Out Come the Wolves is much more like, let's write this beautiful piece of music.
It's a more of a poetic album, just generally.
This is a more punk rock record than Out Come the Wolves, but
it's a more of a youth album too. I think Out Come the Wolves is a little more like mature kind of.
Very much so.
Like again, the third song on there is about Wolverine on this one. So we're this is still teenager music. It's also the perspective is a little bit different lyrically because most of these songs are about Tim's experience through his alcoholism and his time at the Salvation Army, and a lot of that's being chronicled here. So it's kind of funny because you have like early Operation Ivy, and we talked about it last week. It's very adolescent music, and that's kind of what gives it its charm. It's the music of kids. This is a little bit of the music of kids, but a kid who's been through a really rough experience the last couple of years.
Street kid.
Yeah. Again, not like a natural street kid in that kind of way but they did add a natural street kid in the band at the same time though, when they brought in Lars, which really gave I think a little bit of, and Matt and Tim will say like, we thought we were tough. And then Lars came in the band as far as this kind of thing, but also there's also the militantness of Rancid was already existed at this point. So Tim it was Tim's project to stay sober that Matt was keeping him in. They pick up the dysfunctional kid from the UK subs who gets really drunk and it makes everybody mad the first night they meet, and everyone wants him kicked out except for Tim, who's empathetic, which is okay. You guys gave me a chance. We got to give this guy a chance. They said it's the funniest thing. The hardcore punk rock band had like the most strict set of rules. Like, if they even saw Lars with a beer, he'd be kicked out of the band. Like, it was that kind of level of that kind of urgency, intensity, and insulation that they did.
Tim, though,
yeah, and it is, but it did sort of create again that urgency that you're talking about. I think the identity of the band got, like, a lot of how people talk about Rancid, I think, comes from this album even more so than Wolves. Even though Wolves was a lot of people think of Rancid as in more generalized term of the gruff vocals and the spirit of 76 and all. Not that they didn't have that on Outcome the Wolves, they absolutely do. But I think a lot of those impressions of the werewolf lead singer and all that, a lot of that comes from this album, because this is where we got in, most of the music public got introduced to Rancid through this album, not necessarily Outcome the Wolves. I'm trying to think of an analogy from another band, but this is the band. This is the album that got them discovered. It wasn't their biggest album, but they got discovered based on this. And as we talked about, the whole theme of Outcome the Wolves was a reference to how popular they got, the major label Feeding Frenzy. Look when this came out. This came out a couple weeks ago for the anniversary. That means we're a couple weeks after Dookie and Smash have come out, and what we talked about earlier, there is money to go around. There's going to be, and you have these guys who used to be in this legendary band that was kind of a godfather to this genre, that all the hipsters that are working at MTV and Spin Magazine really grew up listening to, that those same guys are in, and these guys are even cooler than like Larry Livermore said that the SoCal stuff, he called that baggy pants punk. Or baggy shorts punk. And I love that, because you and I, as baggy shorts people who like a lot of skate punk, I think that's kind of fitting. And he thought of the San Francisco bands of Op Ivy, Rancid, Green Day. We talked about this last week as more like heartfelt and more like emotional and more sensitive. And he's 100% right, I think, with that. And the LA bands are more either intense and wanting to fight you, or they're sort of like intellectual and brainy, where Rancid is the street poets in this genre of the baggy pants or baggy shorts punk, you know.
It's one of these things that, like, I think that you had a really perfect scenario pop up, because you have this album coming out, so it's already written and recorded and everything, right? Dookie comes out, Smash comes out, and you're like, oh, we have an album fixing to come out. It's already written. It just so happens to be legitimately punk rock. But like you said, now we have some money to advertise it. And so I do think that a punk rock band basically snuck in the back door of popular music and was like, oh, by the way, we're with these guys.
Yeah, when would this have been given a chance in almost any other time period, right?
Not even a chance. Listen to how fast these songs are, dude. These songs are fast, dude. That's the one thing that I couldn't stop thinking about, was when I was listening to it, how fast the songs are.
Well, and so that's the talent in some of Tim's vocal delivery, is he squeezes like these full sentences into Matt Freeman and Matt Freeman at the same time. We don't need a water, let the motherfucker, and he's just going and going and going, and it's really like, it's an impressive performance if nothing else. Yeah.
I watched a lot of videos making that Tim Armstrong thing, and I saw him and Lars interacting as young men. And it's so clear how well they connected, and then how I don't think that Matt Freeman gets enough credit, because without Matt Freeman getting Tim and picking him up and going, hey, man, clean yourself up, bro. You got to get your shit together. We wouldn't have Rancid. Like, we just wouldn't.
He's the heart of the band. He's like the heart and soul and the best musician. Like, he's not the star. Those two guys are the stars.
I got a gnarly sunburn.
Oh. But Matt is the most essential, I think. Like, that's the thing that makes him so much different than every other band. We
I will say this
a couple weeks ago. Like, it's just he's a luxury that just no other band has a Matt Freeman just at their disposal.
People say that Matt's the one part of the band you couldn't replace, and in my opinion, there is no part of this band you could replace.
Agreed.
They are either a together band or they are a not together band.
Yeah, I saw.
Because look, you got Tim Armstrong side projects, not as good as Rancid. Large and stuff, not as good as Rancid. Charger and Devil's Brigade, good bands. These are all good bands. They're not as good as Rancid. So when you take these parts and you split them up, you just simply don't have the same magic.
No, and I remember that was years ago. It was like a Facebook post that someone did, and they were doing that with like a bunch of bands. It wasn't just Rancid, and a lot of people were like voting for Lars on that one as the most replaceable. Like, they already had a great album with that. But like,
what?
No.
I'm sorry, but Self-Titled 93 is not even
No,
close
yeah.
to their best
Again,
album.
so I've actually thought about that, and I think it dovetails into the Let's Go conversation. I have a real funny relationship with that album where I like it a lot, but I never like I just don't consider it a lot. And I think of it as more proto Rancid because Lars isn't there. Like I know it's a
Right.
Rancid album. It is a Rancid album. Undoubtedly, it's got good songs. Lars is there very shortly after, so it's not like super disconnected from him. But to me, like my Rancid is those three guys doing
So
that thing, and so I just give their stuff a little more like weight, the stuff that he was in, and I look at that other stuff as more like preseason Rancid or something. You know, I don't really know.
I do it and I don't agree with that like simultaneously because I definitely understand like where you're coming from.
Mm.
I just don't think the album's that good. Like it's in perspective, like within their catalog, you put it up against almost any other band, and it's the same thing with the 2000 record. It's better than most band entire catalog or their best album. I I think that they were just getting started though. Like that's just not their best music. And there's these
Well,
like hipster guys that are like, oh, 93 is their best album by far. I'm like, dude, just objectively
and
wrong,
that's why I
bro.
had to mention it because I know a lot of people who are hardcore Rancid fans have such a sentimental attachment to that album that they
It's
feel
weird,
like
isn't it?
a little bit different. I do think that album, Let's Go, and at least the most and Tomorrow Never Comes are part of one sort of side of Rancid, and then I think Op Ivy, you could put that in there. Wolves, Indestructible, and Dominoes are another one of the two main tranches, and then I think Self-Titled and Life Won't Wait are just their own extremes of the kind of those two sounds of like there's
Yeah.
the driving punky stuff that I think Let's Go, Self-Titled, and the newer album gets, and then there's the the ska and the pop and the more eclectic stuff that Wolves, Dominoes, and Indestructible brings in. And the other two albums I think are just extreme examples of those two versions. I do think Life Won't
I
Wait.
think Honor and Troublemaker both fall into the same category as Indestructible.
I was gonna have you tag in just because you know those albums a little bit better.
They
I was trying to
sound
escape without analyzing those. Yeah,
there's so much that they
same,
fall into
yeah.
that. Yes, they are very much that because they sound, dude. You can mix up. You can make a mixtape of all four albums: Indestructible, Dominoes, Honor's All We Know, Troublemaker, and if you could fool with the equalizer a little bit, maybe mess with the mix a little bit, you can make it sound like a one coherent record.
Yeah,
Cohesive, excuse me, cohesive, coherent,
yeah,
cohesive record.
and that is, and when we do the comparison thing, that is the style I probably most prefer from Rancid, more so than this style that they have on like these
Yes.
albums. But it's not like this is a bad one, or not like it's a bad choice. It's just what I think made Rancid super super special was kind of that stuff. And I think they talked about.
I like catchy music. That's just what I like.
Yeah,
So, like,
yeah. That's and Rancid does it really well while still keeping
No.
a hard edge, like kind of no one else really ever did. I know Grimple was a band like in this early form,
Bro.
that they were really like into that they cited at the time as one of the things, and because they were, and I've checked out a few sources, they were a little self-conscious about not doing Op IV2, which kind of seems like why they waited a little bit till Wolves to kind of like bring that sort of force back. They were trying to blaze their own
Fuck
trail.
that, guys. What are y'all
with this
doing,
stuff.
man? You should have done Op Ivy too. What are you talking about? Quit being assholes and share the beautiful music that you got in your brain with us, man. I would love to have just gotten Op Ivy too. What are we talking about? I think people would have. Well, I don't know. There would have been. I think it would have been far more split down the middle than it is now.
And who again who
Grimple's
knows?
awesome, by the way. I love that band.
What if though the ska punk thing isn't like that? People don't have that on the radar because it's not the late '90s quite yet. And so as you're saying, Green Day and Offspring are getting signed, and then if they have a ska album, what if that just gets like left behind? You know what I mean?
That's true.
I mean,
That's true.
it's a funny counterfactual, but what if it's because it's the punk?
I want to point out that they have an overwhelmingly large amount of anthemic, catchy songs on this record. They're just played at a tempo that is just far faster than anything that they did on later records. There isn't anything that they did since this record that's this fast that I can recall, except maybe 2000. But even then, it's not even as fast. It's just chaotic.
But 2000 is more explicitly hardcore though, so it doesn't seem as extreme. Kind of, do you know what I mean? Where
maybe.
this is taking music that doesn't have to be this fast and like kind of extending that to it. I think like on 2000 the guitars are tuned to like what a hardcore would sound like. I think it's just it has more of a vibe.
Another thing that I want to bring up is that the guitar sound on this album is different than it is on any other record that they make.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I think that they were really just getting to know each other. I think that Billy Joe Armstrong has something to do with it. It has much more of a Green Day tone of like guitar tone. Mm-hmm. It might be a little produced a little different. The mix might be a little different. It might have the highs turned up a little bit more, but it sounds like that kind of sound to me.
And then on the mix,
early Green Day, like early, like
a lot of the rock and roll kind of style things. So on that mix too, that's part of Brett talked about that in the Smash book that Brett Gurwitz, I should say,
right.
So they were all in. They made this album. They really liked it, and then it was almost pressed, and then Brett realized that it only sounded good in his car. So he realized he mixed it to his ear, and you know about this making albums. You gotta, that album's gotta sound good everywhere, and that's sort of how you settle on the mix. Well, he didn't realize like he was kind of too. And again, he's literally blowing up with the Offspring at the same time this is happening. Dude might have been a little distracted as he was doing this, but he said it was good. It was right before they sent it to press. They went back in for like an emergency mixing session, and got it to the sound that it's in. So even it was done pretty hastily, but I wonder what that original mix sounded like. But you think of that sort of the precarity. And now I don't know to believe Brett. All of these stories are now starting to start with him in his car, because we told the Offspring story when he would come in and play and he couldn't park his car. So I don't know if Brett's just driving all the time. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but that's what these stories of our original. But I kind of believe him because it is mixed very like consistently. It has a very consistent tone of something that might have been kind of mass produced in that way. The catchy songs though, as you're saying, even they are super fast. Like think of like Sidekick and Tenderloin and As One. Those songs are just barn-burner, which is the point where Tim's voice sounds like someone who's been talking too much almost at the end of them, where he's almost out of the thing. He's also a better singer a little bit later in how to like control his voice and make that sound just a little more natural. That was just learn.
He's a punk rock kid in this album still. He's not a full grown mature adult yet. I mean, I don't know what his age was, but he wasn't there yet.
Early 20s at that, if they're kind of like late teenagers in Op Ivy, you know what I mean?
So they have this like, you know how the Op Ivy guitar sound has like this reverby tinny sound to it?
Yeah.
That sound is like not replicated, but there's like a tip of the cap to that sound in this guitar.
Yeah, it's just used in a different way because it's more of a driving.
Right. And then they have very mature lyrics in this album for somebody that age. Like, but yes, okay. Does it drive you that they say vigilant sidekick and not vigilante?
It hates me that it took me years to know what the lyrics to any of that of Sidekick were, because that would people used to like. So it's one of those things where like no one I knew really listened to punk, but you'd be in my car and you'd have to hear the punk songs and people would make up like their own funny versions. And Sidekick was another, because people liked X-Men, right? So I'd be like, hey, here's the song about Wolverine, and they're like, I have no idea what it's saying.
I mean, I had a dream I was a vigilant sidekick. It's vigilante sidekick, not vigilant. It drives me nuts.
Is it vigilant though in the lyrics?
It's vigilante.
Oh, yeah, I always thought it was vigilante. Did you think it was vigilant? Because he's a vigilante's sidekick. He's Wolverine's sidekick, right?
I don't know, bro. It doesn't make sense to me though the way they sing it.
Because Wolverine's the vigilante and he's a vigilante's sidekick. His name is Tim. He's a lesser known character.
Yeah, but they don't say vigilantes. They say vigilant.
Well, Tim's never been accused of pronouncing things. Okay.
Well, no. I'm just saying it drives me nuts because when I was young, I didn't understand what they were saying because I didn't realize what they were trying to say.
I got what you're saying.
Wrong. I was like, what is he saying there? And when I figured it out, I was like, oh my goodness, you're saying the wrong word. It's just like when people say guillotine. It's not guillotine. It is guillotine. The word is not. It makes me so angry. Whenever MMA guys do it on national television, he's got him in a guillotine.
In the guillotine choke.
It's a guillotine. The word is it is fucking guillotine. It makes me so mad, bro.
Yep, the two L's make it go. Yeah, I'm making my English teacher heart happy, but yes.
Glad that I recognize that though. It makes me so angry, dude.
No, but I think I was making the comment about Tim. I've had that experience. I've had like these life-changing Rancid songs that I've gone back and like thank you lyrics.com for knowing I was following the wrong ideology on that whole perspective the whole time. Tim doesn't have as much of the affected voice though on this as he does like when he's not trying to be, when he's trying to be faux Joe Strummer, he developed that like the Tim voice. He doesn't quite have it yet here. It's still that young guy Tim that's being interviewed by Matt Pinfield that's kind of like shy and stuff, you know.
One thing I wanted to bring up, I'm glad I didn't forget. You had mentioned that the first album, since it didn't have Lars in it, that it was like proto Rancid. Have you gone back and watched any of their live shows from 93, 94?
About a year ago, I did a little bit on my channel.
Did you notice any of the stuff, like how much better the song sounded when they had Lars doing backup on the like 93 songs?
No, I didn't take note of that, but
I just happened to catch it. I was like watching a video, and I was like, I wasn't looking at it. I was listening to it while I was doing something, and I was like, what was that? I rewound it, went back. I was like, that sounded weird, and it's because it was Lars singing songs that Tim sang, and Lars was singing. He was going back and forth with Tim. I wish I could remember what song it was, but it was the song off of 93, and I was like, wow, if they could re-record that record together, it would be like, that would be a thing that I would love for them to do, is go back and re-record 93.
That'd be kind of fun. Just kind of do it basically the same songs, but with some of their sensibilities, technologies, and stuff they have now. That'd be cool.
What Brandon Steckenart could do to that album?
Oh yeah.
Like, what? It would be a whole different album. It would just be crazy. I think it would be so much, and in the new production, like it would just sound like a whole new album. I think it would be amazing to have that. I would love for that to happen. I mean, I don't think they have the time and desire to do that, but that would be a pretty cool project. If I had the money to pay them to do it, I would.
Yeah, he is Lars is in the Dina video, isn't he? Isn't he performing with the band in that video? I want to say.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
It's funny. He comes in pretty quick after the first album. Like it's not a whole lot of time, but he's still not that big of a contributor on Let's Go from like a song.
I think they had most of Let's Go already written.
Probably.
And he was like, "Yeah, that's good."
And it's mostly Tim's like personal album about the experience. I know they're a pretty like famous trio of Brett, Lars, and Brett Gerwitz, Lars and Tim in the studio. And so they fit together real well. Lars told the story once and it was when Brett was still in the band, that they became such a tight band that they would make the same, like not make the same mistakes, but like one person would make a mistake and they would just change the song when they were playing live because they were so into, like almost like an old school rock band or something like that, where, you know, maybe Brett played the wrong note or something like that, and they would just follow the song where it went, and they didn't have to talk to each. They were just such a band. And I think the Op Ivy album, this album, even the self-titled, it captures a band very, very much. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about, of how it sounds like monotone and it's rough. It also sounds alive. It does not sound static at all. For the monotone, I agree. And that's a comment that a lot of people have made about, maybe a criticism of Rancid's music. They very much capture like a punk rock room, though, in this, for as clean as it is recorded, all things considered. I mean, they would go on to much cleaner things in the next album, but they really captured like a band. Like it looks like, I don't think that
it does
live
sound
thing
like
might not have been
show.
That much different. Yeah, it does sound like music that is meant to be heard in a club. I think even more so than their later stuff, which is produced a little sweeter. This stuff sounds like it comes from a club.
I think I'm going to put some time in on this record in the next couple of weeks and just listen to it a few more times. I just want to get refamiliarized with it. I spent a lot of time with it as a kid. I listened to this album as much as I did Outcome the Wolves because it was side A, side B on a 90-minute tape for me.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, and I had it, again, it's funny, I piece these things back together. I always say, like, I listened to Rancid more at home, and No Effects and Bad Religion were a little bit more like driving. For whatever reason, Let's Go was in the driving mix, and that's why I remember specifically skipping around a lot of the songs. It's a pretty good driving record, too, because it's kind of upbeat. It's got that kind of thing.
Going like 97 miles an hour the other day. Listening to this record, I was like, I gotta slow down.
With the loaded
in a hand. Yeah, dude. Like every song on there, I was like, okay, well, what do I not like about this record? And I think I was just burnt out on it. Is really what it is. I think I was just burnt out on it, and they had new stuff that I was a little more interested in at the time. Because once you go below the surface of this record and you really start digging into each song, there's not a lot of fat to trim. You could have made it an EP and an album, but like the EP would be argued as just as good as the album, and then you'd be like, well, why did they just make a longer album?
Yeah.
It's a catch-22 with this record.
And again, our criticism is literally our criticism. I think it's a very kind of almost personal criticisms that we have of the album, which is, I mean, it's important and helps the perspective on the album. But like, and we're putting out like this whole thing has been the biggest disclaimer on saying, despite everything we have said, it's 100% certified classic. Like
I think that's how I feel about it. Despite everything we've ever said about it and everything that I've ever said about where it places in their discographies, like rankings, this album is almost perfect. It's like a 9.85 out of 10 for me. I think I would like to have one or two songs gone, but only one of them is a song I don't really like.
We need to hang out in like the summer of '94 because
Man.
because like we're like 3 weeks away from Linoleum, from Punk and Drublick coming out, and like Pennywise is about to have their album come out, and then Bad Religion is about to hit Stranger Than Fiction. Like, jeez.
Okay.